Time for my final thought. The country woke Saturday morning to the news that convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein was found unresponsive in his jail cell, the victim of an apparent suicide. Epstein, a multimillionaire with deep political ties to both Democrats and Republicans, was arrested last month on charges of sexually abusing dozens of young girls in the 2000s, as well as federal sex trafficking, charges that could have landed him in prison for up to 45 years. In fact, it was our very own Labor Secretary Alex Acosta who brokered a sweetheart plea deal more than a decade ago that allowed Epstein to roam the streets up until recently. It was shortly after the announcement of his death that conspiracy theories began to fly across the internet, with fingers being pointed in nearly every direction, with some suggesting that his death was faked and many more suggesting his suicide was in fact murder. Because Epstein's disappearance is a great turn of events for many powerful people in this country. These theories aren't just being spread by the average person on the street either. They're being amplified and spread by the media and government officials, including the man who sits in the highest office in the land. And here's another more important question. What now happens to all the victims of this man who were waiting on their day in court? Will they be allowed to tell their stories, or will their justice be denied to them again? Try to remember that there are women who were children at the time of their victimization who are seeking some semblance of justice. The time is now for an investigation to find out why such a high-profile prisoner who had already tried to kill himself was taken off suicide watch. Why is there no camera footage? Why is he not checked on every 30 minutes as mandated procedures dictate? And why was he alone in his cell, which is again against procedure? And once that's done, we need to get justice for those women. Nobody should get away because of what happened to Jeffrey Epstein. Too many already have. We're going to continue this conversation online. You guys have a beautiful Monday. Get up, DC.